I guess. And again, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Williams and Mr. Herr. Let me ask, you touched on early on, Mr. Williams, an issue that we've been discussing with previous panels regarding the request in H.R. 22 for relief from the current contribution plan into the trust. And I'm interested in this idea that you've proposed about, instead of going with the 8-year plan as had been envisioned by Mr. Potter and others, looking at a 2-year window and then, I believe, reassessing at that point. Could you expand on that a little bit? I think it has some value. I haven't heard the other argument about why we shouldn't do that, but if you could.
Actually, we're fortunate enough to have GAO, and that was their proposal to either stop or pause after the 2 years. So I'm going to ask Mr. Herr to.
Mr. Williams, you did mention it, though, right?
We did not.
No, you did not. Okay, Mr. Herr, I'm sorry.
Yes,
okay.
That's fine, no problem.
All right.
The reason
I give you great credit then. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's the reason that we think that it's important to do the 2 years is, one, we recognize that immediate financial relief is warranted. We think, given the financial situation the Postal Service is in, the amount that would be covered would be $2 billion and $2.3 billion next year. So we think that would help them overcome the cash shortfall that they're anticipating for this year. But we also think over the longer term, it's important to ensure the sustainability of the fund, to ensure that those retirees and their families are covered. Okay. When they have that, to have some certainty that that benefit will be there for them. The thought behind the 2-year idea that we're sympathetic to is that it provides also the Congress with the opportunity to come back, take a look at this in 2 years to see whether or not the Postal Service has made the kind of changes that are needed to help it become, really thinking about its business model and becoming more financially sustainable. So that keeps your option open to come back, see whether or not you'd want to do this again to provide 2 more, or you go out for the additional 8. It doesn't forego that. It just simply gives you more options in terms of policy.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go back and forth a couple of times with that idea, back to the proponents, and see where we come out here. Let me jump to another issue, which is the housing relocations. Mr. Williams, we did have a couple of stories in the press. I know one by CNN about somewhat exorbitant prices being paid for relocation of Postal Service employees. A fairly large amount. It looked like over $100 million in 2007, 2008 for relocation purposes and for employee reimbursements, I guess. Have you looked at this issue in particular?
We have just received, actually when CNN first broke the story, we began, Senator Grassley called us, and we worked out a request for an audit of the area, and we've commenced the audit. And then Senator Collins joined the request and expanded on its parameters a bit. So we've just begun looking at that specific issue. We were very pleased to work with your staff as well, and have at least had discussions about it. We're trying to look at the instant case, and we're trying to find other cases like it, and then we're trying to look at best practices employed by others, and we hope to, in a timely fashion, provide light on it in time for this look that Chairman Gallagher referred to, in hopes that we can affect its outcome and make sure that we've informed the debate on both sides and allowed enough information to be present to alter the policies.
Okay. I just want to, if it helps, we would make a formal request to join with Senator Grassley and Collins as a House entity interested in that issue. So whatever is required of us to get involved and included in that loop on information, the committee would greatly appreciate it. At this point, I'd like to yield to my colleague, Mr. Chaffetz of Utah, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too had questions about the relocation assistance policy, so it's good to know that you're moving forward on that. Mr. Williams, Can you give us any insight and confirmation that there is indeed an investigation regarding Mr. Potter specifically as it relates to this possible sweetheart deal that he got from Countrywide?
There's a very broad-based investigation going on involving Countrywide being conducted by the United States Attorney's Office. It's in early stages, and we are cooperating because of the incident that you explored and reported on earlier. We've done as much work as we can until records begin to arrive in response to a subpoena that was issued by the Department of Justice. They're mostly concerned with instances where there was a clear quid pro quo, but there are going to be, and there are other loans, including the one that you brought up and discussed with the Postmaster General, that also need to be examined, and light needs to be shed on those. So,
is that something you'll specifically be looking into?
We are. It's under the direction of the larger investigation.
Okay.
And that also is going to dictate a bit of the pace of it. But knowing of your interest, of course, we're going to make you aware of.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
result.
My understanding is, and I want to see if you're aware of the 2 postal employees in Elkridge that were recently arrested for stealing more than $600,000 in stamps and selling them on eBay. Do you have any reason to believe that this is a widespread problem, and do you have any other light on this specific instance?
That's a very large instance. There have been other instances of both the theft and diversion of postage. Postage and cash, of course, are commonly dealt with, and they can also be concealed. They can be moved from machine to machine, and the Postal Service has a very good policy of how to keep track of that and close out timely, but policies aren't always followed. And in this instance, that's precisely what happened. It's been a long time since those have been audited. When they were audited, we confirmed that the losses were quite large.
Are there mechanisms, I guess, being put in place to deal with it so that it doesn't happen even on a small scale?
They're doing their best to assure that the policies that are in place for accountability and rapid closeouts are being confirmed with.
Thank you. Mr. Herr, this idea of 2 years versus 8 years, I just want to explain, would that give them sufficient time in order to maybe develop a more long-term plan?
I think that would be one of the benefits you could see. I mean, as I mentioned in my oral statement, we think that what that would also would allow Congress to keep an eye on how things are evolving in terms of the financial situation. One thing I like to point out about how the payments are structured over the 8 years, they start off at $2 billion, but then by 2016 they actually go up to 4.2. So much of the relief is front-loaded, if you will. So that 2-year period would allow Congress to look for a plan, look for what some of the options would be going forward. We outlined some of those in my testimony as well.
Very good. Last thing, Mr. Chairman. Again, going back to the President's commission that was executed a couple of years ago, this idea of a postal network optimization committee to look at the closing of facilities, is that something you've taken an opinion on or want to state an opinion on?
It's something I think in the past that's come up previously. I think part of it would be a question of how something like that would be structured. Obviously, closing postal facilities anywhere is an issue that is difficult for the service, I think partly because of interest from a number of different parties. So it may be important to provide...
Do you see anything formally underway at all?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead,
sorry, please. Yeah.
There's a great deal of activity with regard to examining the possible combinations and reduction of this oversized network that we have. So, but it's not a national effort. There's a great deal happening at the local level, and then the job of the national effort is to make sure that the big highways that the mail move on and so forth are not disrupted by local decisions. But there have been a lot of closures already. There have been 60 airmail centers and 52 annexes, 10 remote encoding centers. There have been 10 of these successful local efforts. There are 16 on the horizon now, and deeper into the process, there are the beginnings of as many as 40 more. That's another way of engaging in this without a BRAC type of effort, but the BRAC type of effort does have merit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, I don't know if you're here for the testimony of Postmaster General Potter and of Ms. Gallagher, who was formerly on the Compensation Committee. In looking at the framework that the Compensation Committee uses to determine the CEO's salary here for the Postmaster General, there seem to be a couple of balancing statutes. One is a statute that I believe 2006 requires the salary to sort of be pegged to the vice president's salary. 120% of that is a maximum. And then there's another part of the statute, I believe, it might have been PAEA, that says the salaries, to the degree possible, should be comparable to private sector. Those seem to be, at least in this case, at odds. In terms of the process they used in arriving at this salary and then applying the bonus and the whole package, did the Compensation Committee operate within the I think, legitimate framework? I know they had the same struggle in terms of the testimony of Ms. Gallagher. She said they sort of struggled with the two statutes, and perhaps it's Congress's fault for entering into an area of considerable ambiguity in the statute, trying to get people to follow two directions that are necessarily are not going in the same direction. But your own opinion of the job they did.
Some clarity with regard to the two references and the two directions would be useful. I know that what we tried to do was, when we became aware that deferred compensation had been paid, we tried to work with both your staff, and then we also worked on the Senate side to try to draw together all of the legal references and assure that there was a legal basis for both the bonuses and then for the usage of deferred compensation, which I was not familiar with. We worked with OPM as well, and they're telling us that this situation that occurred here was the one for which their opinions had been formulated. That if a salary and a bonus goes over the cap, whatever that cap is, that it may be paid in deferred payments. And then we asked them, had it ever been done? Because in my knowledge, we'd driven off the map at that point. They said 23 departments had done it, and there were 81 individuals that had been given deferred payments for this. There does seem to be a legal basis for both of those, for the bonuses, and you gave some of the citations. They're a bit fragmented, and there are a number of them. And then for the deferred payment, we rely upon Title V and OPM. Actually, GAO has done some legal opinions with regard to abuses of deferred compensation, and it does not appear that what happened here.
Let me just sort of refine my question a little bit then. The deferred compensation aspect of this. You have a current year cap, and it seems to me that they exceeded that cap by putting the money into the next year, or not necessarily the next year, but future years. It looked to me, as someone who worked for 20 years for a fixed wage per hour, it seemed to be a way of getting around the cap by putting the money in other years, which I thought, at least at first blush, contravened the intent of Congress in putting in a yearly cap. Am I wrong on this, or how usual is this? Is it a function of Mr. Potter, using his example, has been an employee for 31 years, and so obviously over those years, and these are his latest years, 30 going into year 31. Obviously, he's built up some value in his pension fund, and I guess what I'm asking, is it a function of that he's in the latter years of a long length of service, in the post office, and now his what he's got there, the corpus of his retirement is compounding rapidly now because he's at the end of his career. Is that it, or was there a conscious decision by the compensation committee to inject something, make a contribution into something that actually exceeded the statutory cap?
The deferred payments were not a result of the accrual and increasing in value of his pension as far as we could determine. It looked as though that they arrived at his salary, and they did use consultants to do that, as Chairman Gallagher said. And then they had the two bonuses, the one for the PFP and then the one for the contract that Governor Gallagher was describing. Those went over the cap, and so it defaulted to this OPM decision and process for when that happens. Then that is to pay it in the next year for which you are eligible and have not reached the cap. So in most instances, what that means is after retirement, and that's, in all likelihood, that's what's going to occur with regard to the Postmaster General. So it was the bonus.
Yeah,
And
it's
his
a windfall
decision.
then.
I'm sorry, sir.
It was a windfall.
I'm not sure if that's precisely the word
Well,
I would have used. They
yeah,
knew that
okay.
they'd gone over the cap, and then
Okay.
then they defaulted to the direction of OPM, and that was the applicable statute.
All right, I'm sure I've exceeded my time limit. Why don't I yield to you? Okay. Well, let me ask you, what would you suggest as a remedy? We can't have this situation where you have a cap. I mean, do you think it would be worthwhile for Congress to consider clarification of the statute and then, cap everything, plug these holes, and address that whole, year-to-year deferment situation?
I have not, because my jurisdiction sort of ends at the postal boundary, I have not found out what caused OPM to develop this system of deferred payments. That would be a good thing to learn and to discover. We have some idea, but I'd like to have a much better understanding of that, and it certainly isn't. The only reason that we're having this committee examine this is because it was disclosed by the Postal Service. Apparently it's happened in 81 instances in 23 departments. This is a very large issue, and I don't understand why it was created.
Okay.
It could have some merit, but I just don't know of its origin.
All right, that's a fair answer, and if you're the Inspector General and you don't know, then we all have a problem, and I'm sure you are being very diligent on the issue. Maybe it's something the committee needs to look at separately and apart from this one instance that might be clouded, because we keep referring to Mr. Potter. Maybe it's better to look at it as a sort of a statutory issue, take the personal politics out of it. Mr. Potter indicated that he thought the only way back to viability is really through mail volume, increase in mail volume. Technology does not support that trend, however, with the use of emails and folks, paying their bills online is becoming, as the computer-savvy generation gets a little bit older, it's usually old folks like me that use the mail for paying their bills, and so I don't see that situation getting any better. Do you think the facts out there and the trends support Mr. Potter's assumption that things can get better on that end, and that we can balance, we can get this system back into viability on volume?
I'm not sure all the mail is going to come back when the good times return. I do believe that the end of this crisis is going to come, and that some of the mail will return. I think a better option are the ones that Mr. Davis and Ms. Norton were talking about, a new model and a new plan. There are a lot of options for viability out there for us. I think it's going to be a very different type of postal service when we come out of this. Actually, shipping probably has a brighter future, and certain kinds of mail are going to become very important. And we can probably migrate into things such as saturation or neighborhood mail in a way that we have not in the past. As I imagine the future, very powerful sort of first mile, last mile alliances with the competition would have all kinds of benefits. It would be financially rewarding. And then at the same time, it would allow a single large truck to go through a neighborhood instead of all of these trucks bumping into one another and moving through through all these crowded neighborhoods from UPS and FedEx and no longer DHO, but the Postal Service. I think coming together would be a very green solution and it would be financially very viable too. I think we can incentivize employees in a better way, and we can deploy them against the operational model in a more flexible, agile fashion. I like what we're doing with seamless acceptance and the intelligent mail barcode. That's going to allow all kinds of benefits for the customers and for internal operations. The Postal Service got much better in the last few years on using information and gathering information. To Bill Galligan is sort of a national treasure with regard to the development and understanding of operations that helped us immensely tighten the efficiency of the operation.
Okay.
I'm pretty hopeful. Okay. Maybe not for the same reason, but we have a lot of options. The other thing I loved about Congressman Davis's comment is we do need to listen more. Our customers are very, very bright. Yeah. And sometimes I think we're very guilty of not having listened to them. And the people that make the equipment they're as smart as can be. They live by their wits. And I think a lot of times we turn them away with wonderful ideas.
Okay. Mr. Herr, in your testimony, you suggested that beyond the Postal Service's aggressive plan here, that they say is urgently needed for viability, you suggest that may not indeed be enough, what they've got on the table right now. Right. What action do you think is needed here if that is not enough?
Well, at this point, they're looking to take $5.9 billion out in costs, and as I mentioned earlier, that would be unprecedented. And they've made good progress on it so far this year, but to make sure that happens without any additional shocks that could come, say, from a fuel increase or something like that. So, as we mentioned in the state, they need to be sure to think about looking at retail facilities, if there's opportunities to do that. And we specifically mentioned facilities in urban areas rather than small rural post offices. We think that may be an area, places that have multiple options. Other things, work with the unions to find ways to there have been some real efforts to reduce costs for delivery services, and that's been a real breakthrough agreement that they had with one of their unions on that. So there are ways there to move forward too. And I think more broadly, because 80% of their costs are compensation and benefits, they need to take a look at what options are there, because that's certainly the largest cost center. Yeah.
And given the transportation costs associated with the post office, we have caught a real break here. Since in the past 8 months with the price of fuel. So that's been somewhat of a stimulus, or we've dodged that bullet while we're facing some others. I'm not sure if the gentleman from Illinois has any questions. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Williams, Mr. Herr, it's good to see you both. Mr. Herr, let me ask you, the Postal Service is required to pre-fund 80% of its future liability for retiree health benefits by 2016. Do you know of any company in the country that is required or chooses to pre-fund on such an accelerated schedule?
I'm not familiar with companies, but I do know in the federal government, other agencies, including GAO, pre-fund retiree health care benefits. And my understanding from talking with our financial folks at GAO is that this is the Postal Service was behind in terms of making these payments, and so in a sense, this represents an effort to catch up. And that's why the number of employees is large, and for that reason, the size of the payment is large as well, sir.
Also, under H.R. 22, the Postal Service would still be pre-funding on the order of some $2 billion a year by 2016, a little more than 4% of the unfunded liability per year. Although most private companies do not pre-fund at all, do you know any percentage of companies, what percentage of companies in the private sector that might fund at that level?
I'm not aware. We did not look specifically at the private sector. We took a hard look at the numbers the Postal Service had provided to us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Williams, let me ask you, we're obviously looking for all of the cost savings possibilities that we can possibly find, hope to find, look to find, if there's anything to find. When you look at the Postal Service's utilization of fuel, do you have any comments that you could make relative to what their utilization seemed to be?
We have recommended to them in the past that they engage in the purchase of futures of fuel, and of course that definitely faded into the background when the price of gasoline spiked. As it lowers again, it might be tempting to reconsider the purchase of that. I think as the network is right-sized, there'll be fewer places to drive between and among, and that's going to result in some conservation. The possibilities for alternative fuel and is very exciting. I'd love to get more involved in it, and I believe we're going to be meeting with Congressman Serrano on exploring some of those possibilities. Those would be great solutions if the technology is mature enough. We've taken a false step in the past with ethanol. We bought ethanol, 1,300 trucks, and we don't use ethanol fuel in them. We use regular gasoline because of the availability. So it does pay to look before we leap, but there are some exciting possibilities out there in that front.
And we've all been excited and delighted recently, at least in the last 3-4 months, but we never quite know what might happen in the future. Right. And just as we've experienced some price reductions, it's also possible that we might be in a situation again where the prices escalate, and I mean, that is a possibility.
I agree.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to thank both of you for your great testimony here. Thank you for helping the committee with its work. We'll continue to work on a couple of these issues outside of committee, but outside of hearing. But we really appreciate your willingness to come here and testify today. You're free to go, and have a good day.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
I would like to invite the next panel up just to get you seated. This has just worked out really well. Yeah. What's that? Okay. I'll be right out. I'll just do the first two. Is Mike on? The green light? Yeah, it's on. I'm going to have a driver leave it horseshoe. Okay, you go right ahead. All right, no problem. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. Goff, Mr. Mappa, Mr. Keating. I appreciate your willingness to come before the committee to help us with its work. It's the committee policy that all witnesses are sworn in, so I'd like to ask you to please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Mr. Dale Goff is the president of the National Association of Postmasters of the United States. Dale Goff is in his 39th year with the U.S. Postal Service, which began as a postal assistant in New Orleans. He has been a member of the National Association of Postmasters for 29 years. His NAPA positions have included state president, national vice president, national president, among others. He was also Postmaster of the Year in 1994. Mr. Charles Mappa is president of the National League of Postmasters of the United States. Charles Mappa is a postal and military veteran with 35 years of service. Mr. Mappa has been a member of the National League of Postmasters for 24 years. He has also served as the California branch vice president, executive vice president, and president. Mr. Mappa was elected national president in 2006 and re-elected in 2008. Mr. Ted Keating, is president of the National Association of Postal Supervisors. Mr. Keating worked for the United States Postal Service for 40 years, following 4 years with the Air Force. Mr. Keating began his membership with the National Association of Postal Supervisors as a member of the Northeastern Branch, 498. For 15 years, Mr. Keating served on the Massachusetts State Executive Board, including 9 years in which he held the position of Secretary-Treasurer. Mr. Keating was elected to the position of Executive Vice President of the National Association of Postal Supervisors in August 1998. Mr. Keating retired from the U.S. Postal Service in October 2004 and has assumed the presidency of the association in December of 2004. Welcome, gentlemen, and Mr. Goff, if you could, we'll welcome your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Dale Goff. I am president of the 40,000-member National Association of Postmasters of the United States, NAPAS. I am also Postmaster of Covington, Louisiana. I represent the managers in charge of the 27,000 independent post offices in this nation. These post offices serve urban, suburban, and rural communities. Some of these post offices support a network of postal stations, community postal units, and contracted postal stations. Other offices are so small that they define a community, employ just a postmaster, and have limited hours of operation. For customers living in isolated towns, a post office is their lifeline to the outside world. During this past summer, a New England postmaster illustrated this point at a PRC hearing on the universal service obligation. The postmaster serves a remote offshore town and is the commercial hub of the island. The post office is the town's pharmacy, since mail or the drug companies are the primary means of dispensing medications, and the town's bank, since postal money orders are used for commerce. The picture being painted today is not very pretty. Mail volume is crashing, and so is its associated revenue. Service cuts and work hour reductions are deep and wide. Residential and business customers feel the squeeze as postmasters are being directed to cut window hours, close on Saturdays, consolidate delivery routes, defer necessary repairs, and restrict access to mail supplies. Service and safety are being compromised. These actions are the result of factors that are beyond the control of the agency. The economic contraction has swallowed up mail volume and revenue. My fear is that too short a financial lifeline is fool's gold. As frontline managers, postmasters are highly qualified to offer input with regard to the financial instability of the Postal Service and long-term strategies for streamlining its operations. First and foremost, it is crucial that the committee report favorably H.R. 22, bipartisan legislation to provide the Postal Service and its customers a temporary financial lifeline. This measure permits the Postal Service to accelerate the effective date of using the Postal Retirees Health Benefit Trust Fund to pay current retiree premiums. It amortizes the remaining fund liability to a more attainable period of time. This proposal is neither a bailout nor does it cost U.S. taxpayers a dime. H.R. 22 is fair, responsible, and helps protect the universal postal service. It is imperative to note that the crisis plaguing the Postal Service is beyond its control, and a fiscal climate exists that Congress did not envision when the Postal Reform Law was enacted. Now the tools with which Congress equipped the Postal Service and the associated fiscal requirements are problematic. Postmasters are troubled by budget analysis, which theorizes that temporary postal relief would undermine efficient business practices and aggressive cost-cutting. Mr. Chairman, extinction of universal postal service would be the product without passage of postal relief legislation. In the absence of such legislation, postal doomsday falls on Wednesday, September 30th, 2009. On that date, the Postal Service will no longer be able to perform its constitutional duties on behalf of our country. 8% of this nation's gross domestic product is tied to the Postal Service, so failing to respond to this crisis is not an option. The administration can help to alleviate this crisis. The Office of Personnel Management has the authority to more accurately recompute the 2002 estimate of the USPS projected overpayment into the Civil Service Retirement Trust Fund. The calculation made by the previous administration was significantly understated the overpayment. The Postal Service can help itself. Clearly, the immense postal bureaucracy contributes to inefficiencies and costs. In 2003, NAPIS testified before the President's Commission on the U.S. Postal Service about the necessity to delayer the bureaucracy. Last Friday, the Postal Service took a step in the right direction, but fell short of this mark. Fortuitously, last week I glanced through the manuscript of a 1951 hearing before the House Post Office and Civil Service Committee. The hearing record relates that the Hoover Report on Government Reorganization provided for the decentralization of the Postal Service into 15 regions, enabling closer supervision of the more than 40,000 post offices. Mr. Chairman, today we have 13,000 fewer offices than in 1951, yet the Postal Service finances about 6 times as many districts as proposed in the Hoover Report.
Mr. Goff, you've exceeded the time limit. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to let you finish your statement when I come back. Okay, I know you got a few more pages there. I'm reading along with you. But I've got a vote on the floor, and I cannot miss it. Okay?
Yes,
Actually,
sir.
I've got I've got 2 or 3 votes, and these will be the last votes for the day, so we'll be able to finish up when I come back. Okay? Thank you, and again, I apologize.